Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, thanks for tuning in and welcome back. Another round is here, and this time everyone's bringing back old favorites. Mike and Ryan have wins under their belts, and Dawn and Dylan want a piece of the action. Will they crank out a win tonight? Stay tuned and we will find out. Let's start out by showcasing our fighters this evening. First, we have Ryan bringing back Godo, Bandit Warlord. This deck aims to win in the first 3 turns with a Godo Helm of the Host combo finish. You need to be ready to stop him and stop him early. Next, we have Dylan bringing back Oona, Queen of the Fae. Milling their opponents is the name of the game, and this deck aims to do so with big mana and infinite combos. Always be cautious when this commander hits the table. After that, we have Dawn bringing back Kess, Dissonant Mage. Storm counts and big stacks are usually in store when this commander pulls up to the table. Make sure to be prepared with big explosive turns. Finally, we have Mike bringing back Tymna the Weaver and Thrasios, Triton Hero. This duo can be piloted many different ways, and Mike is there to make sure to keep his deck strong and resilient. The flexibility is unparalleled. Without further ado, let's kick off this dramatic dictation of daring dichotomy of these dueling decks. Dawn wins the Ghost Pepper Challenge and gets to start us off. Dawn plays a Drowned Catacomb and passes. Ryan plays a City of Traders. He casts a Mana Crypt and then casts a Basalt Monolith. Finished up, he passes. Mike plays a Flooded Strand for his turn. He cracks it to find a tropical island. After that, he casts Noble Hierarch. With nothing else, he ends his turn. Dylan plays a Flooded Strand of his own for turn. He cracks it to find an Underground Sea, and then gives the turn over to Dawn. Dawn casts a Mana Vault on his turn. He then casts a Coalition Relic and a Soul Ring. Finished up, he ships the turn to Ryan. Ryan draws a card, looks at the board, and decides to pass the turn. Mike plays a Polluted Delta on his turn. He casts an Arbor Elf, and passes the turn. Dylan plays a Snow-Covered Swamp. He then casts a Scroll Rack. All wrapped up, he passes. Dawn decides to pay 4 and untap his Mana Vault during his upkeep. He draws a card for turn and decides to pass. Ryan loses his Mana Crypt trigger on his upkeep, losing 3 life. He plays a Lotus Petal. He cracks his Lotus Petal for red and attempts to cast Godo, Bandit Warlord. Mike responds by casting Brainstorm. He digs into the top 3 and finds nothing. Dawn then responds by casting Force of Will, exiling a blue card and losing a life. And with that, Godo is countered. He then gives the turn over to Mike. At the end of Ryan's turn, Mike cracks his Polluted Delta to find a Watery Grave into play tapped. Mike plays a Scalding Tarn for turn. He then casts Preordain. After that, he cracks his Scalding Tarn to fetch up an Underground Sea. He casts a Demonic Tutor, searching his library for a card. Afterward, he casts Dark Confidant and ends his turn. Dylan plays an Island for turn. He transmutes Tolaria West to fetch up a Mana Crypt. He then casts Mana Crypt. After that, he casts Everflowing Chalice, kicked once. He activates his Scroll Rack, setting aside 2 cards, drawing 2 cards, and putting the first 2 on top of his library. After that, he plays Mishra's Bauble and passes the turn. Dawn draws a card, looks at his hand, observes the board state, decides to do nothing, and passes the turn. Ryan draws a card, likes what Dawn is doing, decides to do the same thing, which is nothing, and also passes the turn. On Mike's upkeep, he reveals a Reflecting Pool through his Dark Confidant trigger. He plays a Verdant Catacomb for turn. He attacks Dawn with his Dark Confidant. After that, he ships it to Dylan. At the end of Mike's turn, Dylan cracks his Mishra's Bauble to look at the top card of Mike's library. Dylan loses his Mana Crypt trigger on his upkeep and loses 3 life. Dylan attempts to cast Paradox Engine. Dawn responds by casting Delay. Dylan's Paradox Engine gets exiled with 3 time counters on it. After that, he activates Scroll Rack for 3. He plays a Swamp for turn and then casts a Mox Opal. After that, he casts Portent, targeting Dawn? He arranges the top 3 of Dawn's library, and all wrapped up, he passes the turn. At the end of Dylan's turn, Dawn puts a charge counter on his Coalition Relic. Dawn plays a Marsh Flats for turn. He cracks it for an Underground Sea. Dawn then attempts to cast a Paradox Engine of his own. Mike responds by casting Negate. Dawn then responds by casting Pact of Negation. Mike, in a surprising turn of events, casts Muddle the Mixture, which none of us have ever actually seen hard cast before, targeting Dawn's Pact of Negation. Out of answers, Dawn's engine is countered. He passes to Ryan. At the end of Dawn's turn, Ryan pays 3 to untap his Basalt Monolith. Ryan casts a Worn Power Stone on his turn. He then casts a Wheel of Fortune. Everyone discards their hands and draws a new hand of 7. He casts a Mox Opal of his own and a Chrome Mox, exiling Desperate Ritual. Finished up, he passes. Mike reveals a Regrowth from his Dark Confidant trigger. He plays a Mana Confluence. He then casts everyone's least favorite 1-drop, Mystic Remora. He casts a Soul Ring and taps his soul ring to both cast and activate Sensei's Divining Top. Afterward, he attacks Dawn with his Dark Confidant and ships the turn to Dylan. Dylan plays a Sunken Hollow on his turn. He then casts a Gilded Lotus. He activates his Scroll Rack for 4 this time. Afterward, he attempts to cast Isochron Scepter. Dawn responds by casting a Mana Drain, and the Scepter is countered. All wrapped up, he passes. At the end of Dylan's turn, Dawn puts a charge counter on his Coalition Relic. Dawn plays a Watery Grave into play untapped, taking 2 life. He casts a Mox Opal. A Mystic Remora trigger goes onto the stack, and Mike responds by activating his top. Not liking what he sees, he cracks his Verdant Catacombs, fetching up a forest. He activates his top again to dig for a better card, and then the trigger resolves. Dawn casts a Preordained, scrying 2, and drawing a card. After that, Dawn casts Time Twister. He holds priority and casts Into the Royal Kicked, targeting Dylan's Gilded Lotus. Mike responds by casting a Mystical Tutor. Ryan responds by casting a Dual Caster Mage, targeting Mystical Tutor. And Dylan responds by casting Mana Drain, targeting Dawn's Into the Royal. Dylan's Mana Drain counters the Into the Royal, Ryan fetches up a Heat Shimmer on top of his library, and Mike fetches up a Force of Will. One of Mike's Mystic Remora triggers resolves, and he draws a card. He then casts Swan Song, targeting Dawn's Time Twister. Dawn responds by casting Flusterstorm, targeting Swan Song. Mike responds by casting Vampiric Tutor. His tutor resolves, and he fetches up a card on top of his library and loses 2 life. A Mystic Remora trigger resolves, and Mike draws his card he fetched with the Vampiric Tutor. Mike then casts Force of Will, targeting Time Twister. Out of answers, Time Twister is countered. Out of gas, Dawn passes the turn. Ryan draws a card, looks at his hand, and passes the turn. On his upkeep, Mike taps his Soul Ring to activate Sensei's Divining Top and pay his Mystic Remora trigger. He reveals an Avacyn's Pilgrim through his Dark Confidant. He casts a Grim Monolith, and then plays a Marsh Flats for turn. Afterward, he casts Paradox Engine. Everyone laments why so many spells were used up on the Time Twister, and the Paradox Engine resolves. He plays a Mox Diamond for the Paradox Engine trigger, not discarding a land and letting it go to the graveyard. Everyone knows it's over, so Mike shows his line. He casts a Yawgmoth's Will. He then casts a Demonic Tutor out of his graveyard, fetching up a card. After that, he casts Mystical Tutor, fetching up a Dramatic Reversal onto the top of his library. He activates his top to draw his Dramatic Reversal. He casts Isochron Scepter, putting Dramatic Reversal under it. After that, he casts his commander, Thrasios. With Infinite Mana and Infinite Storm, he activates Thrasios to draw out his library. With his library in his hand, he casts his finisher, Aetherflux Reservoir. Ladies and gentlemen, what a match! 3 blue decks again made sure that the spell slinging was profuse. Mike wins this match and is now tied with Ryan at 2 wins each. Dylan and Dawn are down, but definitely not out, as they want to get in wins of their own. Tune in next time where we will see who will be king of the competitive EDH table. Thank you so much for watching, and we will see you next time.